His call sign is AI6YR, and he's quite an individual. He's been a amateur radio operator since 2013, but he did something really unique. He became a technician class, a general class, and an extra class, all in the span of 2 weeks. So he was all gung-ho to become a ham radio operator way back when. He incorporates in his hobbies restoring a lot of old radios, including a Heathkit SP100, Heathkit DX60, Hammerland HQ170, Yaesu FT7B, Yaesu FT747, Heathkit HW101, and even some more modern gear, some Kenwood TS430, TS440, and so forth. So he's a busy guy working on radios, and he operates from home using an off-center fed dipole with a homemade 4-to-1 ballon. So he's the quintessential ham radio operator. He was also recently appointed as the ARRL technical specialist for the ARRL Santa Barbara section. So we appreciate you agreeing to come and visit us, Ben. Tonight you have a program about a unique little bit of research that you did that assisted a lost hiker in the Angeles National Forest. So please welcome Ben, AI6YR.
Thanks a lot. Great. Well, let me share my presentation here if I can find it. Let's see here. And you should have a PowerPoint up on the screen. Whoop, wrong one, huh? Let's try this one. Still not working here, huh? Are you guys seeing the PowerPoint or the extra slide page?
I'm seeing it.
This funny picture.
Okay, good. Okay, great. Well, so what I'm going to talk about is I don't know how many of you have seen the news stories, and I'll show you a little clip. In fact, that includes Sgt Gilbert here, which I managed to find a hiker based on his a photo of his feet. And this is a photo here, and it was all over the news. And actually made it onto Good Morning America, was in Reader's Digest, and went everywhere. But what I wanted to talk about is what does all of that have to do with amateur radio? And it's funny, when you get into amateur radio, you say, hey, there's a bunch of fun things you can do. You can learn a lot about different things. And it turns out it's funny when it ends up being useful. In this case, help find a hiker and get him rescued. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and feel free to stop and ask any questions. So let's see here. Go next slide. We'll go. So this is a news story that came out. This must have been April of last year, and so I'll just play this.
We're not getting sound if you wanted to have sound, Ben.
Oh, not getting sound? Okay, let me try this then.
No, it sounds like it could be way, way low, but I'm not getting anything on mine.
Okay, let me see here.
And once you get the sound restored, you may want to restart the video.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that. Share sound, how's that work? Let's see.
New at 11, a lost hiker used a dying cell phone to send a single photo and a message for help. But how could a single picture of two shoes in a rocky canyon lead to a life-saving recovery? Well, that's when the internet and social media come together to create a mountain miracle. Tonight, we're learning more about this unlikely and incredible rescue from the Sheriff's Department and the longtime ham radio operator who saw the story on social media and against so many odds helped rescuers bring a lost hiker home. A hiker lost in local mountains and getting desperate. Renee Compion sends a single photo and message to a friend just before his phone dies. The photo shows the hiker's sneakers and a rocky canyon below. The message says, SOS, my phone is going to die. I'm lost. Buckhorn site, 2 to 3 miles away in the canyon east of Buckhorn, I think. Having very little to work with, the Sheriff's Department tweets for help, asking if any avid hikers recognize that remote area.
We found one particular Twitter user that we've seen in the past. He seems extremely knowledgeable in regards to mapping and terrain through lots of his other endeavors. We started looking at the information that he gathered.
They connected with Ben Kuo, a well-known ham radio operator.
So I started going through the process of looking at the photo, figuring out where it was. I do a lot of hiking as well, so I'm a little familiar with the area. And I said, oh, I think I know where this guy is. And found some GPS locations and I gave it to the search and rescue guys.
That particular point that he theorized it could be at happened to overlay within the cell phone terrain data that we had. So we figured we didn't have any other good leads at that time, so why not check it out?
The airborne rescuers quickly spotted the hiker during a break in the clouds and were able to hoist him to safety. Renee Compion was uninjured. Search crews say volunteers and sharp-eyed Good Samaritans like Ben are always...
Okay, so that's a bit of a news story there. So why, what does this have to do with amateur radio? And, I think something that people don't realize with amateur radio, and I think the amateurs, most of you guys are amateurs. I know we have a few guests who aren't, but there's so many things as part of our hobby that you learn. And I think that's the best thing about amateur radio for me is you're always learning something new. And so I'm always constantly saying, hey, look, maybe I'll learn about mesh networking, or I'll learn about Summits on the Air, or sending something digital, or there's just, as you know, there's just something to learn all the time. Exploring how things work. There's a lot of problem solving. And I think anyone who does amateur radio knows it's a constant, it keeps your brain fresh, figuring out how do you hook something up? How does something work? Learning how things do. And the nice thing about a lot of this is it's applying those skills to the real world. And I've run across this multiple times, not just in this incident, but in many areas. And it's kind of nice when your hobby, even though it's fun, you get to do something that people that can be useful elsewhere. And the other big piece of amateur radio and how it's helped is, as most of you know, the service to community is such a big part of this hobby. Everything from going and helping at a marathon, or emergency communications, or relaying messages during disasters. It's just such a core part of amateur radio. And that's really how I ended up in this position, is if I wasn't doing all this other stuff and the service to community, then I wouldn't have been in the position. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that I've done, which you would never think have anything to do with finding a hiker, but they do. So first one is amateur radio satellites. And so I don't know how many of you have done amateur radio satellites, but as a lot of you know, amateur radio is the only hobby, aside from the people who are sending stuff to space, the only people who have things in space are amateur radio operators. There's no other hobby. You have where we have ways to communicate with space and have images coming down where we can talk to the ISS and astronauts. And so it's part of a lot of that. I had learned all about tracking satellites, and not just the amateur satellites. All of a sudden you go, hey, there's all these satellites up there. There's all these things we can do. And this is a software called gpredict, which is on Linux, which you can track all the satellites, and you figure out, oh, hey, I know how satellites work. You can communicate with one when they're over. Sometimes they're taking pictures, and I also learned that there's some that you could actually access as just a member public, and that's actually a key part of the rescue. So what did I learn? Just familiarity with all the satellites, satellite resources, so tracking where they are, NASA websites, satellite orbits, and that all had fed into the fact that I use satellite imagery to get to this hiker. And that is all. It's weird because it's an offshoot, but it's because I was doing this other stuff on amateur radio satellites that I learned about all this other stuff that's available. So what else? Summits on the air. I don't know how many of you have done summits on the air, but summits of the air is where you go out. You can either be someone that works people who are up on hills, or you go up on a hill yourself. And I love doing this, actually. So what you do is you find a summit, and there's a number of summits around the area here and actually all across the world where you can go and you can talk to people and set up and communicate with people on summits. And this is one in Malibu Creek, near Malibu Creek State Park, and I'll show you a video of a contact I made. So this is a battery powered radio, a Yaesu, which runs about 5 or 6 watts. And I just had this to a simple antenna. And this was a contact I made when I was up on that hill.
Alpha India 6, Yankee Romeo, we got you in there. We're not, we're a little far, a little ways off you there, but good signal for QRP. Our thing's out in sunny California there. We're in the midst of a snowstorm here at about 24. Alpha India 6, Yankee Romeo, QRP, VE3XYY. Go ahead.
Yeah, VE3XYY. This is AI6YR. Thanks for picking me up. Yeah, things are nice and sunny here. It's actually about, I think about 60.
So that was a contact I had. Is a DX contact to Canada, and I was sitting on top of a mountaintop. And so the fun thing about Summits on the Air, and which helped in this actually exercise, is a lot of things. One is the ability to read topographical maps. So if you go hiking, if you go onto mountains for the Summits on the Air, you've got to figure out where you're going. How do you get there? Where's the best way to do it? And in the background here, you can't see it, but this is a topographical map from a site called SOTLAS. Soda Atlas is kind of the short for, where amateur radio operators go to plan out where do you go to activate and make contacts. And you go up on that site, you see all the peaks and where can you go, and you learn to what are the hiking trails that get you there and all that. So I'm always up there looking for some place cool to go and to activate. And so from doing the Summits on the Air, I started, you read topographical maps, really get used to it, and you actually become familiar with the peaks. This one is funny because this is Summits on the Air, and it happens the rescue that I got involved in was off of Waterman Mountain here, which is behind here. And if you look at all this, if you click on these, you can see how many times people have activated these different sites. So Waterman 128 times, Kratka Ridge is 148. And then this one right here is 3. And if you click on this, they have a nickname for this peak, which is don't try it. and the reason why it's such, this area is such rough country, they said you're likely to get lost and have to call search and rescue. And we'll talk more because this is the area where the hiker was found that I helped point it out. So anyway, learning and using all those tools. I love using Google Earth to do that. And so you say, hey, I'm going to go on a hike. Let's take a look at the terrain and see where it looks like and what it looks like. And you also get hiking skills and knowledge, familiar with trails, familiar with the local peaks and topography. And a lot of it also is practice with RF propagation. And I think you heard in the clip, Sgt Gilbert mentioned RF propagation as being part of this. I didn't know that these guys were looking at that actually when I handed them the information. But I knew from doing a lot of hiking, how that on some parts of the mountain you can get cell phone signal, some parts you can't. And so I'll talk a little bit more about how that helped a little later. But all this and Summits on the Air stuff is skills that I learned not for rescuing a hiker, but just because I love going on hiking on hills and making contacts with other amateur radio operators. Mesh networking. So I don't know how many people have done mesh networking, but those are building high-speed networks. And there's a huge high-speed network here in Southern California we have. They're microwave frequencies. It's really our own private internet, and have a node to do that. We've been using that for sending real-time video. Part of that has been for wildfires and that sort of thing. But even just for fun, So that's another big piece of it. Skills there is terrain, is learning about terrain. So when you start using mesh networking, you learn that line of sight is everything. So, we can get away with, with a handheld, you can get away with going around corners a little bit. But when you start doing microwave, if you cannot see a person or a thing, then you can't get to them. And so because of that, I was playing a lot with RF propagation models and playing with that. And another piece of this is we have cameras. You got to figure out, hey, what am I looking at? This camera on top of a hill. And so I was doing a lot of matching the view of that mesh camera with a map. Where can I see? How can I get from one hill to another hill? And those all came into play as well in helping out with the rescue. So what else? Emergency response, disaster response. So I have been, I think everyone here in Southern California is familiar with the issues we have with wildfires. We have so many of them all the time. And as part of that, I figured out that it was useful. My listening skills as an amateur radio operator are not, anything for a lot. I'm sure a lot of you guys also have scanners and listen, but the general public does not. And I found a few years ago that putting that information out on social media, on Twitter, was very useful to the community. And so I have been putting out wildfire information because of those listening skills gained from ham radio. And I have to mention actually gains particularly from doing DX on high frequency radio, HF. It's pretty funny. We do Boy Scout events often, and you turn on the radio and you listen to someone on HF, and the kids go, I don't hear anything but white noise. You go, don't you hear that guy talking to you? And it's really an acquired skill. And, I think folks who are first responders obviously get used to listening to radio and not hearing things that are very clear and decoding it, but not very many people can listen to a radio and understand what's going on. And so that's been a big part of it. So radio listening skills, situational awareness, just being aware of what's going on. The only reason I saw the post from LA is because I like to keep my ear on what's going on and what's happening in the area, disasters and emergencies and what have you. And because of that, I think the folks who are involved also knew that I was posting information about it. And I'll tell a little bit more about that later. But the fact that I was known to the first responders was a lot more important than me knowing where the guy was. I think we talk about amateur radio says, hey, we want to serve an agency. We want them to know what we're doing. But if we're not actually out there doing something for them and being involved, then they're not going to know who you are, and they're not going to call you up when they need you, and they're not going to trust you when you have information. And I think the wildfire stuff I was doing actually helped out there. Because of the amateur radio stuff I was doing, and I started doing that with the Thomas Fire a few years ago, I became also familiar with the wildfire mapping satellites, which are the same satellites that I used for helping out with this rescue. So all of that, kind of came together. The satellites, summits on the air, the mesh networking, all the emergency disasters, and a lot of the other stuff related to the above, and really was the right place at the right time. And I'll talk about how I did that. But it was all, little pieces of amateur radio stuff I've done coming together in the right place. So how did I do it? So this is the guy's feet. And so if you look at this picture, actually, I'll go back to this. What I did actually is I saw this picture and I retweeted it on Twitter because I said, oh, someone might know something. And then I looked at the picture and I go, hey, you know what? I actually think I can figure that out. And another thing I like doing as well, which is all related, is figuring out where movie scenes were filmed and matching them up. So all this stuff came together and I said, I bet I can find this guy's feet. And it actually ended up finding it in about 20 minutes before sending it out to the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, LA County Sheriff's Department. So here they had mentioned that this guy was around Waterman, not in the post, but in the page when you clicked it to. And I said, okay, I've got a starting point. So I know he's right here. Where is he going to go from there? And if you know the Angeles Crest, there's an Angeles Crest freeway that goes, which goes along the top of the mountain. You're either going to have someone going to the south of that or to the north of that, because there's no way you're going to get lost if you go toward the giant road that's in between. So I figured, hey, the first thing you got to figure out is which way did it go? And go to the next slide here. Let's see here. Oops. Okay, so this is near the general area and Angeles Crest, so that's right there. And then if someone's going there, you're either going to have to go to the north or to the south, right? So the guy's either lost on this side, or he's on this side. It was interesting actually at the time. So one of the other fun things you can do with amateur radio is ADSB, watching aircraft. And I've got a receiver, and there's some receivers you can access. And I was watching the search and rescue helicopter, who was up over here someplace, when I was figuring out where this guy was. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But so anyway, was he going north or south? So I said, well, if somebody is you got to know where they're going. They tend to move downhill, right? People are going to get tired. They're going to think, oh, I'm going to follow a stream out or something like that. So they're either going to go north and keep going, or they're going to go south and keep going, or they'll get hung up on a cliff or something like that. So I said, oh, let's figure out which side of the Angeles Crest was this guy on. So there's a satellite, which I learned about because of the wildfires, called Sentinel 2. And the cool thing about this satellite is it goes across the Earth like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it shows up with a new image of every place on Earth every few days. So I think it's every 2 or 3 days. And I said, hey, I'm going to look at, if you look at the guy's feet, there's this little green valley, and then there's all these burnt hills, and his legs were covered with ash. And I said, hey, there's the Bobcat fire was just there in the Angeles. So he's got to be near the Bobcat fire area. And so you can actually see on the satellite, there's all this brown area is where the fire burnt. And you can see there's all these places where there's a little bit of green. And those are the only places that you could have a photo like his. If you look on the north side, it turns out, if you look at it, there's like no green in the bottoms. So I said, hey, he's got to be on the south side someplace, right? So look at the pictures there. And I said, this photo here shows green in the bottom of valleys, and the hills are sort of brownish. If you look up Google Earth right now, you'll see an archive image, and you can't do that because it is an old image. This might be from I think this is 2017. If you go to Google. So there's no way to tell from Google what that guy was looking at because of that. So knowing that it was Sentinel-2 satellite gave me the more recent data, which meant I could look and say, hey, it looks pretty good. And so I said, he's got to be on the south side because of that. The other part of it is RF propagation. Is I have driven this road before with a cell phone and an amateur radio. And just for fun, I have stopped at pullouts and tried my cell phone. And I tried my amateur radio just because, like a lot of amateurs, I go, hey, I think my amateur radio is a lot better than my cell phone. And so I'd actually gone along that road and tried this. And I said, there's no possible way he's on the north side, given what I know about cell phones, right? You can't get a call in. I think you'll lose it somewhere down the crest. Sgt Gilbert probably knows where, but you just can't get a cell phone signal in most places along the crest. And so I said, it's got to be on the south side. And I did not know anything about the stuff they were doing with actually I just learned about it this weekend. They were doing cell phone analysis and figuring out where stuff was. So I looked at that picture and I said, hey, look at this. I see this green stuff. I see this stuff here. I look through it, and I don't know if you can see it. Depends on how big your screen is. but I said, I think I see it, right? It's like a jigsaw puzzle, right? You got the green on the bottom and you got this hill. And so I've got a little video showing you what I was doing. And I record this later. And if you look around, you can move in 3D and go, hey, wait, look at that. I see something that looks like the hill behind him and green stuff in the bottom. And you zoom in. And you can actually come to something where you think, hey, this actually looks pretty close. And go to the next slide here. And so, whoops, let's see here. So this is his picture. And this is what I came across, which I said, hey, look at that. And if you'll see this, there's this hill here, there's the green here, and I've got another diagram kind of showing where it matches up. So you see this sort of matches there. This ridge line right here, and that ridge line right there. Green here, and the green in that side. So that was what I came up with. So then I went to Google Earth, and I mapped out where that point was. And that's the point I sent to, I actually called in, and that's a very long story, but it ended up being somebody who knew the search and rescue guys was following me on Twitter and actually said, hey, you should look at what this guy is doing, and took the information. After that, I went and I figured out that you can put shadows in Google Earth. And this is after I'd given them the information. And you can set a time of day. And I set a time of day, which was, I think, 10, 15 minutes before they said the guy reported he was lost. It actually ended up being a lot earlier, but it was close enough. And this is what I came up with in Google Earth. And this is what his image came up with. And you'll see how close that is in terms of shape. And so actually I had the Malibu search and rescue guys who are up here in our area actually asked me to come on their team as an advisor last year after all this. And I went to a class from Montrose, the SAR team this weekend. And they said, actually, this is what actually caused them to actually go to the site, even though they had given the information. So here is what I posted. And this was about 20 minutes after I started looking. And this is what somebody sent me, which was the dispatch.
55 by negative 117.9078. Okay, and where did this information come from? So the info came from somebody on Twitter kind of thinking that it might be in that area. When I added that into the RF propaganda, it ends up in the RF propaganda. From zooming in off Google Earth, the rock formation matches, and then adding daylight from the time the photo is taken at 5:24, shadows match what you can see in the canyon. And then adding in a photo taken from satellite imagery on 4/8, the green patches are very close to matching from the burn scar from the Bobcat.
So that was the dispatch. And then I mentioned ADS-B. So while this is happening, because I knew how to track aircraft from all the fun stuff we do with amateur radio, I've actually got one of these receivers in my shed running on solar power just for fun. And here you see this is the Air 5, which is the rescue helicopter, and the point that I'd given them. And you can see over here the location I gave them and where they picked them up. And it ended up being about a quarter mile away. And the story that I heard from some of the crew members and the pilot is they actually went in there, and the location I'd given them was in the clouds and fog. And they said, oh, well, and they started heading up the ridge. And as I headed up the ridge out of the fog, there the guy was. So Rene Campion, the guy who was rescued. So this is where they picked him up, which was not very far from the point that I provided them. So what did I learn from all of that? And this is them getting out of the helicopter. Is you never know what skills if the skills you learn in amateur radio might lead you somewhere else. It might be useful. I never thought all the stuff that I was doing just for fun in amateur radio and learning about would be useful. Establish relationships with agencies before you need it. Because, I think if people hadn't been following me on social media and knew what my reputation was like, it would have been a lot harder. And I understand that my first call in with the information and email, I guess, was still rattling up the chain when they actually went out and hadn't made it to them. So it was very interesting about that. What's silly and fun today? So all the stuff you say, hey, I'm just doing this for fun. I'm learning about stuff in amateur radio. Could save somebody's life. I never thought it would be something where and he was up there with shorts and a t-shirt, no water, no food on his going into the second night. And the last thing is, because there's so much publicity about this, make sure you keep your shack fairly neat. I don't know about you guys, but I have so many projects. I am always fixing something, whatever. And they said, hey, can we show up in an hour with a camera crew? You go, well, no. So it was kind of interesting doing that. So anyway, that's all. Any questions or anything?
Well, not hearing any questions. We do have Sgt Gilbert and one other member of the Montrose Search and Rescue Team. I think Claude had a question. So Claude, go right ahead.
I was wondering about his receiving some of those satellites, especially the EU satellites. Is that an unusual setup that you had to have for that?
Actually, they're all publicly available on the internet, so you can go on and pull up images if you like. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, go ahead, Gary.
And then the routing of the helicopter, what application did you use for that?
Yeah, there's a cool application called Dump 1090, DUMP 1090, which you can actually, let's see if I have one of these cards here. I do have a card here. So this is a SDR card. If you've not played with one of these, they are awesome. So you hook this up to an antenna, and this has got a USB connection on it, and you can receive all kinds of signals. So aircraft is one thing. You can use it as a scanner. You can actually go down to the, if you buy the right ones, you can go to the HF band. You can connect this onto your PC and listen to everything from I think they go down to 0 on some of them, but HF bands all the way up to microwave actually. So there's some amateurs, I haven't done this yet, who are using this to receive space transmissions from SpaceX. For a while, they were taking down the video from SpaceX, so they started encrypting it. You can. There's so many things you can do with these cards. Some of them are not great. You can open your. You can figure out where your neighbor's garage door codes are. But anyway, these things are great.
And then what's the part number on that?
Yeah, this one is. Look up Nuelec, NOO. I'll type in the thing to look up here. The software's Dump 1090, and Nuelec makes pretty good cards. You can buy cheap ones off of eBay from China, but I don't trust those anymore because they seem to get trapped in Long Beach now, and then the quality is a lot lower. Some of them work, some of them don't. So these are about, I think, $25, $30. Yeah, the best toy ever.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
And
Thank
Ben,
you.
It was that card that allowed you to track the movement of Air 5
Yeah.
to the forest?
Yeah, and well, you can also, so the other thing you can do is if you have one of these cards, you can feed it to the commercial sites. So ADSB Exchange is one I like using. Flight Aware, Flight Radar. They all show different pieces. the thing about having one of these cards is they give you a premium account. So you can see everything. So you do set it up and you feed the information in, and they give you something that's normally a $300 account for free. So
Wow.
yeah, but the one I like, I'll type that in. ADSB Exchange is a good one. The other one is Flight Radar. And you can go and see what's flying around on your in your area. So they're a lot of fun.
Okay.
And coincidentally, on that flight radar type stuff, I've even seen some of us, and at our sheriff station, that when we're following pursuit, we'll bring that up to see where the airship is. And all of a sudden on the map, you can see where our airship is following our vehicles. I mean, we have other mapping things that we use too, but I've seen some of our watch commanders start to do that just to get a better idea of, because our airship's generally right over the car. So it's amazing what you can see on the flight aware flight radar.
Yeah, and the other thing you can do is in LA, you can watch all the media ships, all the TV stations, and figure out where they are. So that's kind of funny anyway. I think you're still muted, Patrick.
I remember when this was on the news, it was very fascinating, but now to get the full report on it, thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions? Okay, I know we have two members from Montrose Search and Rescue. Is there any comments that you might want to discuss how the public's assistance could be, could benefit, this type of rescue?
I could maybe comment on that, but I don't know. I don't know, for just continuity purposes of Will, you wanted to comment on some of the technical things you were doing in the background that Ben didn't know you were doing, because we were obviously working on our end like Ben was to solve this mystery, but Ben just did it faster. maybe Will wants to comment on some of the things that, when I say we as a team, it's mainly him because he's our guy who knows this stuff, but maybe you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'll talk about that first, and then you can go into more of, the other side of it. So Will Richards, KJ6JJB. I'm actually ham also. I got Ben's info from one of my buddies who works for LA County Fire, who is on Twitter, who happens to follow Ben because of all of his wildfire stuff he posts and all the different things over the years. So with that, he knew about the search going on, we were on day 3, I think, day 2. I don't remember on this one. Honestly, we've had so many. And I get this screenshot of GPS coordinates that my buddy finds on Twitter. Says, hey, I know this guy. I've seen other stuff he does, and you might want to look into this. So then I went through and plotted it on some maps I had already created, a lot of which Ben had already talked to you guys about, which I had also did the same to double check Ben's info. It was the best set of coordinates we had of anything. Ben's was the only post we saw that was actually a location versus people just saying, oh, I think it's somewhere up this way. It might be somewhere up that way. I think I've been here once or seen it in a video. So Ben's was actually something, substantial for us to work off of. And as Ben mentioned, we did a little technology class this past Saturday at our station for the other teams in the county. And Ben was nice enough to come by with that and talk also. And so with that, I mentioned some of the stuff that we did on our side. So as we guys talked about RF propaganda, so being with the Sheriff's Department, I have the ability to pull cell phone records from, a missing person's phone. So I had those records already requested and had looked at all of them, and I could actually see the time and the location that the cell phone tower was when the picture was sent. So as the picture hits the cell phone tower, I know the exact time of it. So I ended up plotting a Google Earth shading as well as Ben did, whereas I have an advantage once Ben gave me the location, of course, once he did the work, then I had the advantage of knowing the exact time of the photo to plot the time of the cell phone tower hit, to look at shading on that. I made an RF propaganda map that I imported into Google Earth and overlooked that the coordinates that we were expected overlaid in the RF map of that cell phone tower because I had that info. Overlaid the Bobcat burn scar, as did Ben, basically looking at the Sentinel 2 data, which I had overlaid. And then the other thing I had with it, luckily, is the mapping software that we use for search and rescue called Sartopo. I can real time map that into Google Earth. So I can overlay all of these things together and points and trails and search areas and the burn scar and the RF mapping. So, without Ben's data there, it would have taken us quite some time to come up with that. And I honestly would never have come up with the amount of, just kind of looking at the map like Ben did. Once you look at it that way, it seems like, oh, it's so simple. I could have done that, in an hour, but you just never think about doing it, which I was so grateful. Obviously, Renee was also of Ben's work doing that, but that was a little bit what I had on my side. So the only way I would have to relate to that to him is like Ben said, of being able to propagate RF maps and being able to look at, different things and knowing how technology works in that. And interestingly enough, in Ben's PowerPoint there, the video you guys hear of relaying coordinates to the command post was actually me talking. And that's the first time I've heard that video. So that was kind of interesting and made me smile. And the radio that you see in the photo is my buddy who works for LA County Fire, who recorded that video to send Ben. So that's his radio in the foreground, and listening to me talk about that was kind of interesting to hear for the first time. But yeah, that's kind of my take on that, of, just kind of double checking Ben's coordinates before we started sending resources out into quite the middle of nowhere for, just risk of our personnel. But yeah, Ben's coordinates were spot on. And I honestly think the only reason that his coordinates were not where the guy was found, when I talked to him the next day, he had actually been there. He had heard helicopters in the morning. The fog started rolling in. And when that happened, he started walking up the canyon or up the ridge line to get out of the fog, because he knew in the fog he would never be seen. So I honestly think that Ben's coordinates were probably spot on. And with the fog, he started walking. The helicopter got there, couldn't see him, turned up the ridge line, and luckily they connected right there and hoisted him out. During the hoist, there was fog starting to envelop part of the helicopters. I mean, it was very critical timing wise of how everything laid out, and luckily worked out very well.
Yes.
Is that a typical procedure to use all of your computer data and stuff like that when there is a lost hiker?
Yeah. So in our case on my team, I typically do more of the technology side and radio side of things. So if we have a lost hiker or missing hiker, yeah, one of the very first things I do before we usually even have people going out in the field is I'm calling the cell phone provider and pulling all of the cell phone data I can from that person. So typically the way it works is we have special law enforcement numbers we call and info I give them and forms we fill out. And then I can achieve basically any of the data that I need to for the purposes of it potentially having your life on the line. So the fact of you being in the wilderness gives us a certain circumstance where I can do that, because it could lead to death or other things. So yeah, I can go in and I can request basically all your cell phone records from a certain time. So typically I will request them from about the time I know you left by talking to the reporting party, your wife, whoever it might be. And then I'll pull them from, 8 a.m. that day. And the other way that helps us is, sometimes we may not have even found a vehicle yet. So it'll kind of help me determine, okay, you did go up Angeles Crest versus Highway 39 in Azusa. Maybe that morning you changed your plan and you went to Malibu instead, or, you went to breakfast and you're just not answering your phone. So with that, I can kind of use that data to track you going into the mountain. And then from that point, luckily, if you do get reception a couple times here and there, as Ben talked about, reception in our area is very spotty. But, the tower that this guy hit was actually above Azusa Canyon. So instantly I knew there it's above Azusa Canyon. It was at a 300-degree bearing. And then I knew the width of the cell phone antenna. So it gave me a very clean area to work off of versus Ben literally working off the entire mountain. So it does actually narrow things quite a bit for us to be able to do. Sometimes it gets us right to things real quick. And sometimes like this one, it's a little more convoluted. And luckily Ben's skills jumped into play here to help us out.
Yeah, and then when you did look for that cell phone data, did you track it from the tower to the cell phone, or did you look for the cell phone, then the tower?
Yeah, so with that, we actually get both. So when I get cell phone data, it will always give me a tower location. It'll give me an azimuth, or a degree that the phone hit off the tower. Sometimes it will give me distance. Sometimes it gives me nothing more. So in this case, I knew the tower location. I knew the angle he hit off the tower at a 300-degree bearing, and that's all it gives me. There are records that, phone companies store of what they think is the phone's location. In this case, they were all extremely far from where we actually were. Do I have a way to share a picture real quick on here? Let me try that. I don't have a full presentation, but let me see. Do you guys see a picture of a map now by chance?
Yes, we do.
Absolutely.
Okay. So on the bottom right corner of the map there, you'll see kind of a pie-shaped start of a red line and some arrows going off of it. So the arrows going off of that red line are the center line of the antenna, which is at 300 degrees. And then the width of the antenna is 120 degrees. So what that shows you is the overall area of the antenna hitting anywhere on that mountain.
Thank you very much for coming out.
So then what I do with that,
Love it when you guys.
what I do with that is go through then and actually plot the RF map. So everything you guys see in the purple and yellow there is basically what the RF map that I made shows that has a viable area to hit that cell phone tower. Then the last thing you see is that dark black line going around it. So as Ben mentioned, that black line you see is the bobcat burn scar. So he was within that based on the photo we saw. And then up in the center there, it's that black circle with the green location. And I had actually then kind of taken that photo and done my own kind of markings across it to try to correlate those green areas that Ben saw. The mapping software that we use, which is screenshots out of SAR-Topo, actually lets me overlay Sentinel-2 data that Ben talked about straight into my mapping software. So I don't have to kind of correlate from one photo to another like Ben had, was doing. I can kind of look at all that in the same spot together. And then the last thing to point out on this map, if you look down on the very bottom right, area, you'll see like 20 of those little yellow circles. So that's where, in this case, AT&T thought the phone was. So those are the coordinates that the phone gave me or the tower gave me. Says, hey, we think the phone is right here. Where in reality, you guys know where the phone was because you can, Ben found the guy for us up there. But in this case, that data was very wrong. When we get cases that's in the city, that data is extremely accurate and, much more useful. But when we get into mountain terrain like this, it's extremely complicated to try to gather where the phone is straight from that data.
Yep. So just real quick, I did not realize till this weekend that all the stuff we do with RF propagation on amateur radio had all to do with all what Will does in finding people with cell phones. So it's kind of cool that it's a similar technology. Didn't know that till this weekend.
Yeah. Any other questions on any of that stuff?
How about the timeline? When did this occur? In 2021 or 2020?
Yeah, this was April 13th, 2021. Yeah, I think that's about all I've got. Let me see real quick, just for the fun of what this meeting is. If I can pull up one more photo here that you guys just might be interested in from a RF propaganda spot, which doesn't relate to the call we're talking about, but it's some good info.
While you're bringing that up, Will, is this frequently something that happens where we get some type of clues being called in by the public?
To me, this is honestly the first time. So I think Sgt Gilbert will talk a little bit more about that in a minute here. Unfortunately, on our side, the way that this call kind of worked out is it wasn't really giving us a lot of info ahead of time that this was going to be posted on social media. So when this did happen, unfortunately, our station was a little bombarded with all these phone calls and emails and all of that. So as Ben talked about, he did call into the station, gave him the info. He actually got an email address from the station, emailed that info. And unfortunately, that info never got passed to me. If it did, it probably would have been a lot earlier in the morning. But just with our kind of spur of the moment thing here, we kind of got a little overrun with all that info. So personally, this is the first time my team has used anything like this. It was very beneficial, and I could see in the future how it would be very beneficial again on certain calls. But, this was the first one for us, at least, that we've done this way. And with that, do you guys see a new picture on the screen with tons of red dots, hopefully? You guys see some head nodding?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
So this is not related to that same call, but just to kind of give you guys a little more info on RF propaganda and kind of how that stuff works. So these are all, every dot you see is another call we had where the cell phone company thinks the phone is. So every dot you see in this photo, this is about a 6 hour span in time. And what this is doing basically is this is showing a phone that's now in the city versus the mountain terrain. So everything that you guys see here is a ping on the phone that the cell phone company did. This person happened to be on the phone this entire time talking, which is also how we get a lot better info. You know, just like any amateur radio or any transmission you hear or see, in our case with the cell phone company, every transmission's logged. So a transmission would come down to a text message, an app updating in the background, your email on your phone, querying the server saying, hey, is there anything new? Even if there's not, that gives me info to work off of. So what you guys can kind of see here, again, if you start with that yellow pie shape on the right, what that is the center of that pie on the, the left side there is, again, a cell phone tower. And then, a little distance out, you can see a curve and tons of red dots, and you'll see a little bit of the blue underlaying behind it. And what that is, again, is that person happened to be basically on that blue line, but the cell phone tower knows the distance in this case. So it knew it was basically from there to that blue line, but it doesn't know on that 120-degree sector where left to right it is. So it'll start plotting all of these dots, and until you plot a ton of them, like I ended up doing here, you don't notice that curve that's being, shown, that arc around the center of the tower. And if you look more towards the center line of the map, you can actually see one more kind of from the top curving down to the right across that upper valley. And then just kind of inside of that, you can see one big one curving from the center to the left, back to the right, kind of down on the lower side through that mountain pass. So it's just kind of interesting to me to see, all of the hits across the 120-degree sector of a tower. And like Ben mentioned, especially down here in SoCal with the linking of ham radio internet. I can't remember the name of it. I played with it before down here a little bit, but we have a ton of that down here, at least in LA area of that. And it's that same kind of thing. You've got sector antennas. You've got to make sure things line up. Stuff that in that gigahertz range especially is very line of sight, whereas RF propaganda, does give me a little bit more of a wiggle room on some of the lower frequencies with our cell phone tower stuff. But yeah, this just gives you guys a little more info on how that part of it works and what we do from our perspective of it, and how that does play into, pretty much every search we go on for a missing person or a lost person.
Well, thank you, Will. That was really great explanation of the types of resources you have available to assist in locating missing hikers. And
that's
so forth.
Pretty cool.
Did Sgt Gilbert want to comment at all about the Montrose Search and Rescue team as a whole?
Yeah, I'll share a few things, and I'll kind of go a little bit more, wide angle lens on this whole case, because obviously Ben and Will did some really highly technical things. I'm Sgt Gilbert, related to Patrick Gilbert, a little bit. Hi, Dad. In any case, I am also an amateur radio operator, a newly minted KA6JPG. And I am probably the least intelligent person in this entire meeting about ham radio, as well as cell phones and all that stuff. So I help manage the Montrose Search and Rescue program. And so I just, there are a group of volunteers, reserve deputies and volunteers that go out there any time of day or night and help out people in need. So they're really tremendous assets to the community and to our station. And so I'm one of the few full-time paid people, and I just kind of help administer the program. And in this case, we got that call back in April 2021, and basically we're just, hey, a missing hiker. And some of the complications we had initially in this search is where he said he was hiking the general area, and where that car is, there's probably about 5 trails that go in 5 different directions. So without any type of information of what trail they're going to do, he can basically go north, south, east, west, which really complicates our search area. Luckily, fairly early in the night, we were able to get additional information that picture had been taken. And we know as a general rule, and Ben was absolutely correct, as a general rule, if people are able to get something out, they're generally south of Angeles Crest Highway. But it's not impossible to route their north, because there's a lot of different places along Angeles Crest Highway where you actually get a line of sight to the Antelope Valley. So we've had cases in which we do the cell phone data, and the cell phone data comes back hitting on towers on the Antelope Valley side. And so now we know we're probably looking on the northern side of the San Gabriels for our missing person. In this case, we kind of took an educated guess fairly early on that, okay, well, if he had cell phone reception to get that picture out, he was probably south of Angeles Crest Highway. But when you look north of Angeles Crest Highway in that area, in the Cooper Canyon Falls area, there is some similar terrain. So we really couldn't rule it out. And so we kind of educated guess it'd be south, but it could be north, and you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. In kind of my limited time and, helping manage these search and rescue missions, I find whatever you really think, or at least for me personally, whatever you really think the answer is and where they're at, they never are in my book. You can take an educated guess, but it's very easy to put all your eggs in one basket and be wrong. So Will started doing his work, and then that really cemented in our mind that he'd be south of Angeles Crest Highway as soon as he got the data back, and we know it's hitting from a tower to the south of the San Gabriels. And then with everything he demonstrated, we were pretty confident the guy was south. So that's when we concentrated our efforts in that area. But having the fog in there quite a bit really hampered efforts. And the fact that it was, still pretty cold up there, is probably getting into the 30s at night, which if you're an unprepared hiker, that is a life-threatening emergency. So we searched all throughout the first night and did not have any luck or any further clues. I went to bed at like 8 a.m. And then all of a sudden I'm getting messages at 1 p.m. when I'm waking up saying, hey, what's going on with your search? And so I didn't know what was going on. And I did not know at the time that we had released that information out to the public to see if somebody could help. So that was kind of all happening in the background. So I was at home and I started kind of going through these comments on these different social media sites to see, hey, what kind of made sense. And once again, there was I get to Ben's posts and we have them because I also manage our social media sites for our search and rescue team and for our station. So I'm aware of Ben from our Montrose search and rescue page. We have him as someone we follow. So I've seen his stuff before and seen all the good work he does. So as soon as, we filter through all I think he's in the forest, comments and try to figure out what's much more useful. I get to Ben's and it was a very detailed step-by-step thing. And some of the things that Ben and Will did looking at that picture to say, we think it's here. I looked at it and I had a gut instinct that looks right, but I just couldn't articulate why it looked right. And so I called up Will because I knew he was working on the back end for the cell phone stuff and said, hey, have you seen this guy, Ben, AI's 6YR? He's like, yeah, I'm already in the middle of working on it. So he was already, halfway vetting what Ben had done. And so I told Will, like, hey, I mean, it's the best clue we have right now. We don't have people on that stretch because that stretch from the top of Mount Waterman to a place called Triplet Rock, it's listed, I think, in one of the Angeles Forest guidebooks as one of the most technical hikes in the entire forest. Ideally, you'd be an experienced mountaineer with ropes and ways to make anchors and do this thing. So, it's not always our first pick that people go there because it is a tough area to get to, but it's of course not off the table. So we hadn't had people on the ground because we normally like to insert them by helicopter and it had been foggy. So the timing of the post coming out and Ben having the chance to, work his end of it, and then for Will and myself and his buddies seeing that information and vetting it was great timing. And then the time to send the helicopter in and have the fog break enough so that way they can make the rescue and then get out before the fog set back in. It's it kind of is like a Hollywood story, to be honest, because you normally couldn't write this many, fortunate things that all lined up, but it all lined up. And, it would have definitely been a very serious concern to have Renee out there another night or maybe 2 or 3, because, the problem we run into is people don't necessarily stay stationary. So that'd have been great information that day, obviously, but 2 to 3 days from now, it may not have been. He may have moved, and so we would be behind the curve. So our team is very thankful for Ben and his work, and our team and we as the department are extremely thankful for all the volunteers out there, whether it's DCS or our station volunteers or search and rescue teams. We're very grateful for all the work that they do and that helps the public out.
Oh, thank you very much, Sergeant Gilbert. It's good. How many members on the Montrose Search and Rescue team?
I think currently we're around 25. I don't know if Will maybe knows a better number off the top of his head. We're approximately 25 people. Most in search and rescue teams are around that number. Some have a little more, some have a little less. And it's great because, you know, the search and rescue community, we have such a diverse range of skills you need to know. You need to know technical rope rescue. You need to know how to operate in snow and ice environments. You have to be physically fit. You have to have some knowledge of radios and be able to talk on the radios. You know, for us in LA County, because of the missions we have, sometimes it helps sometimes to have them as reserve deputies and law enforcement. So there's so many different skills that there's no one person that can fit every bill. And, you know, having people like Will, who are absolutely fantastic at, you know, doing the technical aspect to help solve this. I mean, you know, an hour's worth of his work that vets out correctly can save us many, many hours of people in the field, which is very tiresome, as well as it is a risk because it is a dangerous job. So, you know, everyone helps to the best of their ability, and some people have really great skills in small areas, and it helps everyone out. And when he's able to do that, it frees up somebody else to do it. So it, you know, it's a really interesting community, and we're really appreciative of everyone that helps, you know, put it together.
Nobody has asked the big question about how many different jurisdictions have a helicopter as great as Air 5.
we certainly are lucky in Los Angeles County. I mean, Air 5 is fantastic. You know, there's 5 crew members aboard, hence Air 5. You know, the 2 pilots and the 3 paramedics. And that helicopter is capable of pretty much flying any mission in our forest. And then if they're not available, we are absolutely blessed to have LA County Fire, which has multiple helicopters that are able to get in pretty much all the same areas and do the work they do. You know, when I go to these coordinator meetings where we meet with different coordinators across the state for search and rescue, you know, there's counties that, I mean, they just don't have the money for that. They literally, the entire county does not have one helicopter. Meanwhile, I think LA County has more helicopters than, like, you know, I think there's only 23 other nations in the world or some unusual number like that have more helicopters than just LA County. You know, so we have such great resource, you know, because to try to go to find Ben, or to find Renee that day without the helicopter by foot would have been very long, very arduous, and there's no guarantee he would have been there at the time we would have gone there. So it's a great resource.
Fantastic. I'm very happy for LA County and the search and rescue members in the Montrose station, and certainly Santa Clarita has also has a very good search and rescue team. But I thank you very much for Will and for Sergeant Gilbert to come and speak today. And Ben, your story is just absolutely incredible. I'm just really thrilled to see how your involvement in ham radio, hiking, and satellite imagery all pieced together to help this one stranded hiker.
Yeah, it was really great to see it come together. And then, like, on the back end, so Will calls the thing in, and then they find him, and I'm jumping for joy at my place. And my next call to Will was, "Hey, what percentage was this Ben's info?" Because I know we were doing things on our end, and we were looking that we were going to probably search that area at some point. And we both kind of agreed to ourselves that it's like 80-90%, Ben led us there that quickly at that time. And as I just stated before, if we hadn't have done it at that time, who knows what the outcome of this would have been. So at that point, it's okay, well, this is a great news story. And I do PIO stuff for our station. So I called up our headquarters PIO people, said, "Hey, this is going to be a good story. It's a great feel-good story. We all did a great job, and Ben did a great job." So I was able to get Ben's number and say, "Hey, you're the hero on this, and then B, would you want media to contact you? Because if you want it, they'll come." And he was very willing and gracious to do that. And so we worked as a department with all of our media resources. That's why within a couple hours, he's got a bunch of news vans out in front of his house, and I'm doing like 4 or 5 Zoom interviews in one evening. But it was that's part of what helped get the story out was. We do have a network to do that. And when good things like this happen, I think people need recognition. And so I was glad that Ben and our search and rescue team could get the recognition they deserve.
Well, it's wonderful to see dedicated people achieving really great things. So, Ben, thank you very much. And Sergeant Gilbert and Will, it's a pleasure to have you comment and kind of educate us as to how this feel-good story actually came about. So thank you very much. We appreciate it a great deal that you came and spoke to us this evening. And we certainly welcome all the visitors that came in and joined the Santa Clarita Amateur Radio Club meeting tonight. One last chance for any questions to our guests.
One little observation from my point of view when I look at it, of everything that I see here, the one thing that really came together is law enforcement gets tips on everything for any purpose, for anything. And sometimes you get buried in a pile of debris. And when you have I have a gut feeling, it's different than having somebody that you can have tell you, this is what I believe, this is A, B, C, D to how I got there, where I'm going, and to have you at least believe the credibility of the person from having some knowledge of who they were. If this had been the average stranger, they might not have gotten the information in timely. And if it hadn't been articulated in quite the way it would have, it may not have been as useful. So real good combination of civilian and law enforcement coming together exactly as it needed to.
You bet.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Actually, you know what? I almost didn't put any information in because I figured that they'd think it's some crazy armchair detective with no idea what they were doing. So I guess it worked out.
Well, this one worked out real good, Ben, and I think you've got a lot of credibility with the Montrose Search and Rescue Team.
I hadn't heard you joined over at Malibu as an advisor, so it's great to have you aboard LA County and helping everybody out.
I'm a resource for all you guys now, so
that's excellent.
So thank you. Maybe a new career. All righty. With that, I'd like to say thank you to everybody who showed up tonight, and thank you very much, our guests. Ben, you were a marvelous program.